is that what I learned to be as a child as a survival mechanism was a liar. And what's interesting is that I could lie better because I hadn't accepted the truth myself. But once I accepted the truth for myself, the lying was more painful. And I knew that I couldn't continue to live in the pain of that lie.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to unraveling the journey of being authentic in the workplace. I'm your host, Sandhya Sudhakar, and my guest today is Eduardo Placer. He's a former stage actor and now the CEO and founder of Fearless Communicators, a public speaking and coaching company. Eduardo calls himself a story doula. He helps bring stories into the world, primarily those of changemakers and innovators, of women and people of color and members of the LGBTQ community. In this episode, it's a little bit different than some because Eduardo, even in the early days of his career, would tell you that he felt like he could fully be himself at work. But that version of him was fueled by this major moment of liberation when he came out as gay at the age of 18. In the spirit of authenticity, Eduardo actually agreed to do this interview as he was home in bed recovering from a surgery. And for the record, I did ask him if he wanted to postpone to a much later date, but he was good with it. And that didn't stop him from sprinkling his favorite Broadway musical lines throughout our conversation. And in this conversation, we really go deep on belonging and what it really looks like, and how he found his authenticity as an actor, and how he's using his talents and his way of being to create a company culture that's overflowing with generosity and care. Thanks so much for joining us in this conversation. Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, Eduardo. I am thrilled to have you on as a guest.
Yes, thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be here.
I am sure that many people in your presence express being thrilled because you are a light. And I want to get into your story. And I think it's impossible to get to any of your story today without really talking about what you've expressed as kind of like your biggest moment of liberation, which was coming out at the age of 18.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump right in, and
we're going to jump right in there. Ooh.
Yeah. Who was Eduardo before that moment?
Before, yes. I would say that I was muted. I don't think people have an experience. I think it's like if you think of black and white and Technicolor, if we think about The Wizard of Oz to be super gay, I think pre-coming out, it was very black and white. And when I came out of the closet, it was full on Technicolor. And I think what happened is there are conscious and unconscious ways that I think your community or the world around you will communicate to you if it's safe for you to be yourself or not. And I think for me, as a Cuban child growing up in Miami, Florida, the child of immigrants, now my family had fled Spain because of Franco and Cuba because of Castro. In some ways, we were operating in a space of translation, and that home life and everything was in Spanish. And then we were in a world that was English dominated, but really kind of Spanglish dominated because Cuban culture is so strong in Miami, Florida. And I think there were ways that I naturally expressed myself even before gayness was an option, which was feminine, and that was problematic. So there was a natural expression that I had. There was a way that the pitch of my voice, I remember there's a memory that I had where I would like climb up on the jungle gym, and I loved gymnastics and I loved the monkey bars. And that's the stuff that I loved. I didn't love like baseball or football or anything like that. And I remember like looking at the girls twirling the batons, and I was like, oh my God, what I desperately want to do more than anything in the world is be a baton twirler. And I think I like confessed it to my mother. She was like, he's looking very longingly at those batons, not at the girls, but at the batons.
Right, exactly.
And I think that there were ways in which already my interests had to be molded. Now, what's interesting is that I have an identical twin brother who's straight. So when we were little kids, And we were on the soccer field. My brother played forward and he played goalie and he played sweeper. I mean, he was basically up and down the entire field, and I could not be bothered. So I was like, I don't even know the position. I'm like upstage left, but I was like fullback, defense. Again, I could not be bothered. And I was the only child, I think, who ever finished a Little League soccer league with a rock collection named after the Von Trapp children. So I was like, and this little rock is Friedrich, and this little rock is Louisa, and this one's Maria, and this one's Rolf. Like I just had my own hyperactive imagination. And I knew that in the sharing of that was weird or strange or not something that other boys my age talked about or created. I mean, necessity is the mother of invention. There were no action figures for The Sound of Music or The King and I, so I had to create them in my own head. Now, I don't know how many people are like, how many little boys are like, Mommy, what I really want is my Anna and the King of Siam action figures so we can like do Shall We Dance? So I think that I got some coding early on that I had to hide that had to exist in quiet and had to be silenced. And I mean, now I have the privilege of running a public speaking coaching business. And I talk about a very specific moment when I was in second grade at Show and Tell, where I basically told everyone in the class that I named the seal that I slept with every night after the boy that I had a crush on in second grade. And that was a moment where it wasn't just like a random expression that I made, but there was a direct communication of a desire or a centering of someone that is not the way boys normally talk about other boys. In 1986 in Miami, Florida, we live in a brave new world now, and not so brave as people think, but still in that experience realized that there was a danger in me actually speaking the truth.
Yeah.
And as someone who desperately wanted to perform and sing and dance and be an actor, of course, that's what I wanted to do because I was performing from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to sleep. So it's really not until later that I realized that in some ways, acting for me was an act of survival. So that's what that was. And then it became passion, desire, do you know what I mean? As profession. But then I couldn't also do it as a kid because my parents didn't have the tools or the resources or even a framework of understanding a world where I could or would be a professional stage actor. They're like, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be
as
an
the
accountant or something else.
Conversation goes, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And to come back to that moment, I think that what happened when I came out at 18, my freshman year of college, and I want to talk about coming out as it's not like a one moment and then it's not one and done. It is an ever evolving conversation. But the first person that you come out to is yourself, right? So there's the existence of an idea of, for me, homosexuality and gayness that exists out in the world. And I have feelings and I have desires, and I may think, but I haven't equated yet that who I am is gay. And that moment, I remember I was a freshman in college and I was talking to a friend of mine that we'd gone to high school together. And he was in a process of coming out and he had a lot of shame and he wasn't saying it. So I kind of interrupted him and I said, let me just say what I think you want to say, which is you're trying to tell me that you're gay. And then he affirmed it. He said, yes. And then I just started asking him questions. And I had this out of body experience where I was kind of like floating above my body. And then finally, like, I came back and I was like, you don't have to explain yourself to me because I know exactly how you feel. And then I said the words out loud, I'm gay. And there's something about thinking it and then saying it out loud, because the moment it's said out loud, the moment it is in the world, it's no longer yours. Mm-hmm. It now belongs to other people. And now they take it and they talk about it and they tell other people. So it's like literally you start a spark and then there's a wildfire. And in the mid 90s, people love that news because that was like, you know.
Was the moment where you named it to yourself internally, when had that come? Was that kind of in that moment as well, as you were asking
It
the questions you wanted to ask him, or?
it was like it was a moment of alignment.
Mm,
I had I had gone to my freshman year of college, and I had made a conscious decision, I would want to say, after my sophomore year of high school, where I was like, I'm not dating women because I haven't met the right woman yet. The right woman for me is not in Miami, Florida. Then I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I was like, she's going to be an Ivy Leaguer. Do you know me? And, and just a different type of quality of woman than what was in my
mm.
world in Miami, Florida. It had, at least, and my mother tried to hold on to that belief after I came out of the closet. It was like, it's not that. It's not that. I don't think it's that. So I think that I'd always had a a desire, for the attention and affection of boys and men. But I had not, when I came out to myself, like, it was a purely intellectual experience. I had not had a relationship with a man. I had not had a sexual experience. So it was all for me intellectual. I'd like made out with girls and I'd held hands with girls, but I had never fully been sexually active with a woman either. And yet I knew that there was something missing. So when I came out to myself, it was like, I think all the math has mathed and it adds up. And then I had to prove it. So then I went to my first gay bar and I had my first little moment. I was like, yep, I'm gay. That's it.
You're like, confirmed.
Confirmed. And then I think what became interesting is there was about 3 months where I was out to myself and not out to my parents. And what's interesting about, I think, specifically talking about the work that I do and this word that I know we'll probably get to, which is authenticity, the word of 2023 that I have some
Yes.
challenges and problems with,
Yeah.
uh, is that what I learned to be as a child as a survival mechanism was a liar. And what's interesting is that I could lie better because I hadn't accepted the truth myself. But once I accepted the truth for myself, the lying was more painful. And I knew that I couldn't continue to live in the pain of that lie. So at about 3 months after coming out, I came out to my parents, and then to my twin brother, then to my sister, and then to my parents. And although painful and terrifying and all of that, I think it's interesting. I often say there's no such thing as private speaking. All speaking is public speaking. To have to say out loud and identify and name the thing that you most fear and invite that and bring that in and start the journey of making peace with that truth and that reality. uh, I think that courageous act became for me the greatest act of liberation, and one that I feel privileged to have done it at 18. I think there are people who wait a lot longer to have that
Yeah.
type of eureka moment, and that happens for them personally and also professionally. Uh, and although I don't wish upon other people the pain, I do wish for them the privilege of the revolution of self, that I can be exactly who I want to be. And I can live in the world exactly as I choose to live in the world. Um, Obviously with love and respect and
Right.
and human
Right.
decency and all the things.
Exactly. In relation to other people.
In relation to other people, always in relationship to other people.
As Eduardo was sharing his story, he says, the moment it's said out loud, the moment it's in the world, it's no longer yours. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what this must feel like. Certainly, there have been things that I've held back from the world or I've had to admit to myself or others. And many of us have grappled with things like that. But in Eduardo's and other stories that have been shared with me about coming out, I've often heard that there's this fear present, that this thing, this part of who they are, that if people knew, it might alienate everyone in their life or that they might lose everything. And it's pretty profound. We've talked a lot on this podcast about the choice between authenticity and safety as this trade off. And this is exactly that. I can be me and risk it all, or I can live a lie. And all of this comes after you first admit the truth to yourself, to own and accept this part of who you are. And after that, it feels so hard to hold it back from the rest of the world. As we get back to the conversation with Eduardo, we're going to dive into what happened after this truth was out in the world. Yeah. So as this process is happening, right? It like internally naming it, right? Okay, the math is finally added up. Saying it out loud to your friend, coming out to your family, kind of like completing that cycle of like, this is out in the world now. All the people that I need to know, deeply need to know. What was happening like in your body over the course of that process? If you think about liberation and that alignment, what did it feel like to you?
I think what happened too is there were several things. One, whereas I would say the earlier part of my life, pre coming out, was about hiding and covering any femininity, because for me, femininity or the performance of femininity or the experience of other people as seeing me as feminine was a flag that I was gay. Now, I'm not equating gayness with femininity, but if we think about tropes that we have before we have gay right, or faggot or whatever the words are, and I say that word with responsibility as a word that has been used for me or against me, that the before that they have sissy and girly, right? So the issue with gayness, specifically for men, I don't believe is gayness. It's not the act or love of being in men. It's being feminine. That is less than. It's showing weakness. It is. It needs to be fixed. And thinking about all the language that we have about performing power, deepening the voice, standing still. That there's a way that we model masculinity as power and femininity as weakness. And that is both internal and external. So I think what happened is when I came out, I then over-indexed on the feminine. I was like, for that had been repressed, I was like, work, she is out. She is out. And I think eventually, if it's a pendulum, like I think that because of that, I think now, people would know if there's a phrase that they immediately equate with me. It's like, yeah, it's like uncontrollable, that beam of light and energy that I have. I don't think I would have shown that before because I would have thought that was feminine. So I would have muted that. So I think that even after I came out, my sister and my brother were like, you're so much more fun. Just because I was just so always hyper conscious and policing myself on gesture, behavior, what I talked about, what I didn't talk about, what my interests were. So I think physically there was like a liberation in a body, followed now by body dysmorphia, and then being like, now, like I'm also stepping into sexual identity and sexuality, and then now I'm also present to toxic femininity. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I'm too fat and I need to be skinnier and I need my six pack and I need my biceps and I need my body to look a certain way, like all the ways that the toxic feminine can now become superficial or catty. And not that I ever felt comfortable in that, but I could note that I was being impacted by that, while I was also simultaneously, as someone who's a stage actor, now we live in a world today, which I would say is stepping into the expansion of non-binariness and the in between. I would say in the mid 90s, it wasn't that. And I think as a gay man, I also had to cover that I was gay to be a professional actor. Like not that I hid it because I couldn't, but I also couldn't walk in to an audition and be like, "Hey, girl, it's time to audition. Let's sing the fucking song." Like you couldn't do that either because they were like,
Yeah.
"Who just walked into this room?" Right? Because ultimately, you're also dealing with.
Mhm.
I mean, you're dealing with an industry where a lot of gay characters are actually played by straight actors. So,
Yeah.
and then they win Academy Awards for it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something, I mean, it's so profound how acting and playing roles has transitioned throughout your life of like
Mm,
that being the escape for you when you were young and in musicals. And, in a way, it kind of, to me, it's like musicals were a way that you could like safely express a little bit of that femininity
totally.
because it's like singing's okay in a
Hmm.
musical, like you're allowed to do
Totally.
that there, right?
Yeah.
And playing those roles. And so you had have had a long career as a professional actor. I want to
Hmm.
talk about when you graduated from Penn, moved to New York City. What were you
Hmm.
doing professionally, acting and otherwise?
Well, I say I moved to New York City with a dance belt, a Diet Coke, and a dream. That's like how I landed in New York City. So I graduated from Penn in 1999, and I had an undergraduate degree in English. I had a BA in English. It's one of my favorite songs from the musical Avenue Q. What do you do with a BA in English?
You
So I moved
become
to New
an
York City.
etymology expert and use that in all ways, just as you
Totally,
do.
totally. Well, I knew that I wanted to act. I knew that I wanted to perform, but I also couldn't afford to perform because of union rules, and I wasn't in the actors union at the time. So they were paying anywhere between $150 to maybe $200 a week to do that work, and you would often do that work outside of New York. So you'd be hired outside of New York for 8 to 12 weeks, non-union. You'd be paid $150 to $200 a week, and then I mean, what do you do with that money after you're paying expenses? I mean, you have an apartment. I mean, in
Yeah.
Manhattan, even in Brooklyn, wherever you're living at the time, it was like unaffordable. So I couldn't afford to do it. So I got a temp job, and I had spent summers in the past temping in New York City because it was a great way to get some money. And I found myself at Standard and Poor's, the benchmark of the stock market in human resources. And I became an administrative assistant for them for almost 3 years. And I think that was my one main corporate kind of gig. And it was a combo platter between Standard and Poor's, which at that time was run and owned by McGraw Hill.
Mm.
So I found myself jumping not only within HR at Human Resources, but then also the executive floor at Tupin Plaza at McGraw Hill, or at Tupin Plaza, but then also at corporate McGraw Hill. So there was a way that I think they also had someone who was smart and bright and verbal and communicative and could do the tasks that needed to be done. And I also
Yeah.
had no attachment to an admin career in corporate, but that also gave me a lot of permission. So
Yeah.
they said that I was like mirth factor, and this was all before September 11th in New York City, but I would during lunch, this is in the early days of Survivor, we would do like physical challenges that we would set up with conference tables and chairs, and people had to like run and crawl and like, I mean, it was
Like an actual
insanity.
obstacle course.
An obstacle course in the conference room. And then I came up with a little jingle when people would walk in, and I'd say, "Welcome, welcome, welcome, welcome to SNPHR," and people were like, "I don't know what the hell is happening," but I think they celebrated. Now, it helped that I wasn't an employee,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I wasn't fully tethered. I was connected, but I was enough of an outsider that gave me permission. Like I didn't need them.
Yeah.
I was
That
grateful for
is,
them, but I didn't need them. And that whether true or untrue, whatever that is, that feel like I didn't need them gave me permission.
it makes so much sense also because I think that when we talk about hiding parts of ourselves or not fully being ourselves, it's like, what are the stakes if I do? What's the
Mm-hmm.
trade-off? What's the potential danger in it? And for a lot of people, it is, I don't want to lose my job. I cannot lose my job. This is my
Mm-hmm.
career. And for you,
Mm-hmm.
there was a little distance there because you were doing that work to do your career. You were doing that work
Correct.
to enable the actual career that
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to do. And so I think it's so interesting just that, like you were able to show up really authentically in that space,
Yeah.
and largely because it wasn't your livelihood.
And it was celebrated. People were
Yeah.
like, we love that energy. And I would go and I would work for 2 weeks or 10 weeks. And then I would have a job waiting for me when I got back.
Do you think that it had, because if you think about S&P and publishing and finance, those are not necessarily welcoming environments
Right.
for self-expression in general,
Mm,
especially someone who doesn't carry an identity that's centered.
mm.
What was it about that environment, do you think, welcomed you?
I think first I was competent,
Mm,
right? So I was smart and I could do the job. So they couldn't argue that. Like my
yeah,
competence was never a challenge.
yeah.
And I think that I know, and this is part theater, but also part, well, it's all theater. I know that my clown, funny Eduardo, can be very magnetic and dynamic. So, and I know how to play that up. So that is an easy way. And I have a friend of mine, she said to me, your superpower is you're a molecule shifter. So I
Mm,
can walk into a room and I can kind of shift the energy. And I think part of that is because I'm also an outsider, right? So I had to learn as a survival mechanism to listen for and feel the room, gauge the level of safety, and then see when to insert and spark and play. And I would say that, and I have been in very compromising spaces for my queerness, where inevitably I think that in the embodying and the speaking of the truth without apology and sourcing that and being joyful, I think people respond to it and they're attracted to it. And I think because oftentimes people want that for themselves and don't have that experience.
mm.
I don't think most people live in the world feeling seen and heard and acknowledged and championed. And I have the privilege and the agency to often create that space for myself. And it's just a lot of practice.
Anytime we step outside of the norm, I have to imagine that there's a moment of kind of testing the waters. In Eduardo's case, he walked into HR at S&P and he led with that, as he says, that magnetic, fun clown version of himself. And it was welcome with open arms. I think sometimes we test the waters and we do get that message loud and clear that our authenticity isn't welcome. And I think other times we may have tested the waters before and we carry that old message with us into a new environment. I recently had a sidebar with a woman at a client workshop I was leading, and she was talking about being guarded and how in this new company she's in, she just doesn't want to do it anymore, that she was exhausted keeping these walls up so high. And where we landed with that conversation was the question of, can you let down that wall 1 inch? Not to tear down the entire wall, but just let it down a little bit and see what happens. And then if you do that and it goes well, maybe let it down 1 more inch. And this is really complicated, but it's very real. If you're feeling like you can't bring you into your workplace, and it's not necessarily based on your current company or team or manager, but maybe based on previous experiences that you've had, it might be possible that you're carrying an old message that you received. And I wonder, is there a way to test the waters slowly and safely to see if that's still true or if maybe more of you might be welcome. Exactly. I think with vulnerability, stepping into like, this is who I am, you are taking a little bit of a risk in those rooms.
Mm.
In some rooms, probably a lot of a risk, but to have that, it's almost like, I want to say fake it till you make it, but it's like, no, I'm all into this. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore it has this ripple effect on other people. And
Right.
it's received differently than if you stepped into that power and that truth meekly, it might be received very differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I've had my share of nemesis, of people who are like, I am a reflection or who I embody or the freedom that I present with or the liberation that I present can be uh, shocking and upsetting and actually something that I may not be somebody's cup of tea, and that is okay. And there's one of my favorite lines from the play As You Like It is sell while you can, you are not for all markets. It's like I'm not Walmart. I'm not the blue plate special for $2.99, and that's okay. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that there is a part of me that I think also that I've had to navigate, which is because so much of my origin pain is a desire and want for love because of a belief that who I am is fundamentally unlovable, right, as a queer person, that there is a part of me that would over index as a people pleaser. And I think that one of the things that I've had to make room for is the fact that sometimes people will not be pleased, and that is going to be okay. And sometimes people will be uncomfortable, and that is okay. And sometimes people will not like me, and that is also okay.
It's the root of that, the molecule shifter, right? The chameleon, the adapt to whatever room you're in.
Mm.
We've talked, that I work with the Enneagram, and we've talked a little bit about it, but that Enneagram type 3 of
Mm.
I can read the room. I know exactly what people are willing to accept, what they want to accept, what their expectations are, how to meet their expectations or exceed their expectations. And I can just shift into that
Mm-hmm.
space and be that person. And then the transition from, am I doing this because I want to do it? Like, am I doing this actively
Mm.
versus passively, protectively,
Mm.
from the experience of, if I don't do that, it's not safe. So let's talk about people pleasing. So many people identify as people pleasers. And in my work, I've recognized that there are so many ways that this can actually come to life. We have these self identified titles that are sometimes things that we latch onto to explain certain types of behavior. But if we dig deeper, we might see that there's a root cause or a motivation to that behavior that we can actually work on or maybe change. People pleasing can look like going along with others and not sharing your opinion, not always even being aware of your perspective when you're around others with lots of energy or ideas. It can sometimes look like doing things for other people, even if you don't want to, or like this almost compulsion to help or solve or fix in other people's lives. And it often ends up sacrificing your own needs or having you in a position where you don't even know that your needs are there because you're so focused on the needs of others. Or it can look like being whoever you need to be in whatever room you're in and slowly getting farther and farther away from yourself. And it comes from patterns that are really deep rooted in us, whether it's personality or trauma or attachment. Many of us have a sense that we have to please people or be accepted by others in order to belong. And belonging is a very core human need. Belonging gets us safety in the world when we're a part of something, when we're connected to people. And this isn't inherently a bad thing to want to belong or to be there for others or to want to be accepted by others, but it can often come with a trade off. When we abandon who we truly are, in service of fitting in somewhere. And so if you identify yourself as a people pleaser, I encourage you to ask what's at the root of it and what's the impact to yourself in your authenticity? What are you giving up? Or how are you sacrificing your connection to you for your connection to someone else? Okay, let's get back to the conversation.
I was wondering in that, I'm wondering if it's sometimes like, am I doing it? And maybe for me, because with any superpower, it can be used to create and it can be used to destroy,
Yes.
right? So there's the power has multiple expressions.
Yeah.
I would say that, again, from my experience, being authentically who I am, unapologetically, and showing up lovingly and in service of the people who I'm in relationship with and communication with, I think inevitably disappears the difference, right? I
Mm,
think because I'm showing up in service to build. I'm showing up in service to create, right? And
yeah.
I oftentimes name my difference not as a form of separation, but I name it as a pathway to deeper connection with my audience, right? And I think that that's kind of a
Yeah.
new awakening that's happening, and something that I'm really interested in, something that's on the emergence of what I'm talking about, which is about belonging and cultures of belonging. But there is a way in which belonging for me has historically been about erasure,
Mm,
hiding, covering, masking, conforming,
yeah.
and can I belong, or do I belong, by owning and being and centering my difference in them, a building and a creating of something collectively that we are looking to create and generate together, right? And I think that that is where I think it's like the next phase of the work in the DE&I landscape, which is how do we not just acknowledge that there's difference, but move through and work through that difference to recommit and realign to shared goals and shared visions that we want to generate and build together. That is not about the erasure of who you are, because at some
Yeah.
point, if it's not acknowledged, someone's getting erased, right? Like it
Yeah.
all airs and blends into whatever that dominant culture or dominant color or dominant sensibility is. And
Yeah.
where's there room for outliers to feel like they can remain different and together and same at the same time?
So I would love for you to share a little bit about like what is authenticity as an actor? How
Mm,
has that evolved for you over time? Because there's something so fundamentally interesting about being yourself and playing a role. How did the two things
correct.
come together? How has it shifted for
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing with authenticity is who I am is equipped as a creative, as a creator, with a very specific spark of, I don't know, spark of creativity or light. So I will read a script and there's certain impulses or instincts that I will have that are how I would play this role, or I would say this line, or I would respond to this moment or this circumstance. And I think as an actor, that's where there's authenticity, which is where an actor has a certain level of agency to take words on a page and turn it into life in a way that looks and sounds and feels unique to them. And I think what's oftentimes happening in an audition landscape is you have directors and playwrights who are auditioning actors as creativities to see which actors kind of look and feel or sound like they think the character looks and sounds,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
you're kind of doing your work, but it's also kind of limited by the words the character speaks. Kind of, there's probably some idea that the playwright has about what the character looks like or how they behave. And oftentimes, I mean, you got to be really good to really shatter the expectation of what a character is supposed to look like. And occasionally that does happen.
Yeah. Got it.
I think for me, the audition is key because the audition is where I, as an actor, have an opportunity to showcase for you my creativity. And it's your job as a director or as a casting director or as an agent or a producer to be like, I'm down for it or I'm not down for it. And it could be, it's just not what I'm looking for this role. Or it could be like, I actually don't like this flavor at all. I never want to see this person again in my life. They have no idea what they're doing. But I think that as an actor, the agency and the onus is on you to always be mining and honing your own creative spark, how it is that you would play the role. And I think for me as an actor, when I trained, so I trained in conservatory at UC San Diego in La Jolla, the woman who was our teacher, Kyle Donnelly, it was all around listening to and acting upon our first instinct.
Mm.
Because oftentimes what happens is I have an impulse and an instinct, and then the brain takes over, and then I become conscious, and then do I want to do what the director wants, or do I want to do what, but like, what was that first impulse? What's that first instinct? Oftentimes that first impulse and first instinct is uniquely yours, right? How you would respond or what you would say or how you would do it, I think is an interesting moment. And I'll give you and sometimes as an actor, you have your authenticity and you have your creative point of view and you're like, this is how I would do it. But then the director or the player was like, that's not how you're going to do it. You're going to do it this way. You're ultimately a pawn in somebody else's creative process, unless you're like a huge celebrity. I think that for me, that moment is the ability to dance in that moment of aliveness. I mean, some people call it charisma, or what I call it, it's presence, which is why we teach presentation, not presentation, but presensation in our work. Like that magical moment is, and being confident in that moment takes practice. And this is something that actors have, right? Now, actors have it in some ways because, or they're more grounded because they know their blocking or they know their lines. They have somebody else's lines. It's different to not be memorized, right? To like be alive in front of an audience. I have a map of what it is that I'm going to say. I have clear, like I know how I'm starting. I know how I'm finishing. I have clear transitions. But there's a term that comes from flamenco that I love, which is tener duende. And tener duende is when the fairies take over. It's that moment of like flow. Or dance, or it's in music when there's a trill or a run that happens that wasn't written, or jazz where like there's the magical mystery and alignment of the moment and music and craft and ability and genius, and it's not repeatable. It's fleeting.
Yeah.
And in flamenco, there's like, to tener duende is like, I mean, it's like hitting it. It's like, that's like the pinnacle. And again, you don't get it all the time. You get a glimpse of it. You get a glimmer of it. And I think that part of what we do in that program is creating the opportunity and experience for duende to arrive for the speaker. And it happens where all of a sudden you're on the train and you're riding that train. Right? And the train's going to get to a destination. We're not going to leave you stranded. We're going to start somewhere. We're going to end somewhere. Yeah. But what you get the opportunity to be is fully alive and present with yourself and with your audience. And that is, it's like a drug. It is a high. It is a heightened sense of connection to self and to community and to other. And I think it's really powerful. And it's, I love doing it, and I love the privilege to watch our clients start gaining their trust and ability in being able to do that. And again, that takes practice. That doesn't just happen. You don't wake up one day and you do it. One does it because they've had a lot of practice.
I love what Eduardo mentioned here. Tener duende. this moment of heightened connectedness. To me, it feels like inspiration and magic. And I have to think about how this translates beyond like an artistic creative endeavor like acting or dancing, but really fully into the creative process or innovation when we're creating something with other people. How often do we lean into that moment and trust that we have the structure we need to support that magic moment and just let it play out? If you can't tell, I'm a huge fan of the work being done at Fearless Communicators. So let's get back to the conversation and hear more about Eduardo in this leadership capacity within the organization. Fearless Communicators is the organization that you are the CEO, founder, lead story doula for. So talk about what Fearless Communicators, what was the mission when you started?
Well, I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to show up in service of the world, that there were so many things that I was passionate about and interested in. And I was clear that I wasn't the expert on all of those things. So I didn't have to speak about all of those things. But I knew that I was uniquely resourced to work with people to show up more empowered, more grounded, more connected to their communication. So if I could build a business that worked with people who are poised to make the biggest difference in the world and elevate how they show up to speak, now myself and my team get to have a piece in all of these conversations that I think are moving the world forward, bringing more light, creating agency and empowerment for voices that we may not have heard historically, creating more opportunity and space. And I think that it's also my own healing journey, right? On the one hand, the opportunity for me to be seen and honored and acknowledged without apology as myself, not putting on a character, not playing a role, which was my theater career, but just as myself in my own words, is also healing for me, right? So I think that was kind of at the root of Fearless Communicators. And I think there's one thing to be good at what it is that you do. It's another thing to be a business owner and run a business. So that's been kind of the learning. The learning is like, it's one thing to have the idea and it's one thing to create the programs and start doing the work. We've had the privilege of working with US presidential candidates, UN diplomats, the first ladies of 7 African countries, Fortune 500 companies, people really poised on the front line of some of the biggest issues that the world is facing, and working in a way that for them feels revolutionary and inspiring and meets them in the moment, does not feel like something they've done before or taken before that they may have a traumatic relationship with. That to me is where the mission continues to evolve and grow, right? And I think that no day is ever the same. People are profoundly compelling and interesting, and what they have to speak about is. And we get to act as translators, and that's part of the story doula piece, a bridge of someone's expertise, so that what it is that they're saying and how it is that they're saying it makes the biggest impact on the audience that they want to make a difference for. So, what started as like a one-man shop is now like a team of 13 people. We work with, again, clients all over the world. They're all primarily, well, everybody has some training as a stage actor, even our operations person. So we are in the world of the theater and stage performers. And I think more than anything, embodied storytellers. So we understand both the priming of the instrument of the human body and how to prime that instrument so we can be receptive to when they're receptive to the power of presence and ride that in front of an audience. And then also expert story crafters, so that we're ensuring that the messages that you're imparting really stick with the audience in ways that they remember you and or your message far after that first contact and connection with you.
Yeah, it's this beautiful propping up of change makers and mission driven people and voices that need to be heard and can make a bigger impact in helping them be more effective in connecting. I mean, it's really beautiful that kind of, one man shop that started as, I want to help change, and how you can funnel that into this thing that can exponentially impact
Mm.
so many people by bringing people's voices out and having them share with more people.
I was clear from the beginning that it was never Eduardo Placer coaching.
Mm.
It was always Fearless Communicators. And I was like, it was always built with an awareness that there was bigger than me. Right. And it's interesting that even the naming it, like the Fearless Communicators are our clients, right? It's
Yeah.
the people that we get the
Yeah.
privilege of serving. So I think in some ways, even in the framing of it, we've
Yeah.
always been audience, community, people focused as opposed to founder focused. And not that there's, I mean, for some people that makes sense that that is how they build their business or their organization. Just feel like from the very beginning, that's just been, I think why we've built in the way that we've built is because that's always been the attention and the intention.
Yeah. How do you show up today as a leader and as a business owner? Who's Eduardo as a leader?
Unapologetic. You know what's interesting? I've now been a business owner for almost 10 years. So it's been 9 years. It'll be 9 years in June of next year. I say 9 years legal Zoom official with Fearless Communicators. And there were like other versions of it that existed before 2015. But we're going to call it legal Zoom official almost 9 years, 8.5 years. I continue to show up humble, right? Because I've never built a company before. Like this is not like the second time I'm at an 8-year or a 9-year marker for building the business, right? There's a lot of complexity in building a business, and the better you get and the more people you bring on and the more types of offerings that you have, it continues to build greater complexity. So I say I show up humble and resourced and always the first to learn, right? So I know that I am both the possibility machine and the stop on the organization. So I have to resource myself to make sure that I keep the ball moving forward. I think I show up confident in my ability. Like I know at this point that there are very few people who are able to operate in the ability that myself and or my team members are able to operate in this specific work around speaking. And it just continues to be validated. And I think it's just hours and hours and hours and hours of doing the work that there's a wonderful, almost freehand or knowing where I think in the earlier days, I just felt like I'm not a parent. I don't have children, but I feel like in the way that a parent is like, I breathe on the child, I'm killing the child. Like in the first, months, weeks, years, everything feels a little fragile. Like I don't feel so fragile anymore. So that also feels really good. And I think I'm also showing up really hungry. I am showing up ready to share. I'm showing up ready to amplify. I think that specifically in the pandemic landscape, I went more into business saving, team building, setting up structures and infrastructures for the business that also then took away from what it is that I have to say and what it is that I have to share about. And I think that's what's now coming in 2024. So I think I am, having done this work now, I have some clear opinions about how to do this work. And I am starting to be more of a vocal advocate for this approach. And I feel like that's the profile of that is also increasing, which is also taking greater courage and fearlessness on my part, so I think that it's interesting. I'm not only the president, I'm also the client. Like the hair club for men, although I don't do hair club. I mean, still celebrating my baldness.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that is, I think there's a fine line between humility and apology. I'm never apologetic, always humble. And when I make mistakes, I apologize, but I don't apologize for myself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I remember as an actor, there was a director that I worked with who said something like, we work too darn hard to be lucky, right? I mean, yes, there's divine alignment. And I've also done the work and I continue to do the work.
Okay. I have to pause here for a second. I really love what Eduardo says here, that there's a fine line between humility and apology. We can show up humble, but also not apologize for who we are. This is it. It's showing up humble, being willing to learn and grow and evolve and admit mistakes, and also holding on to the things that make you uniquely you and never apologizing for those things. Okay, back to Eduardo's brilliance.
And I think the other thing that I'm also showing up is not alone, but I'm showing up in community. I have an extraordinary team of people who are really hungry and really interested and really excited. And I get to show up supported. I get to show up resourced. We get to show up together. So that's also fun, which is that they're also building their platforms and their spaces and they're building their audiences. And I think that's also broadening the people that we get the privilege to make a difference for.
Is there something you can name around how this culture of fearless communicators has come to be so supportive, so generous? I feel like there's just like overflowing cup of love that happens in your space with the people, with you guys, with each other, you all with your clients. How did that come to be?
I think that's top down. I mean, I think that is definitely, I think I don't know any other way to be. So I think that very much, like, I think I create that in spaces that I'm in. I come from a big family. I feel love abundant in my life. I have intimate love. I have friend love. I have family love. I have a big, huge, huge, huge family. And I think that this huge family is a family that has also dealt with historical trauma. And through that historical trauma, remained in deep connection and love. I think part of the revolution is that most people don't feel supported and loved and championed in their public speaking. They have felt punished, belittled, shamed, embarrassed. And I think that we create a space where people feel like they can step into on the edge of safety and know that they're going to get caught. Because ultimately, I believe what they have to say, what they have to share, what they have to offer is bigger than their fear, right? So if we can diminish and lessen that fear, then they can be the lighthouse to communicate what they have to communicate. And it's interesting, there's a biblical verse, which is perfect love casts out fear. And I'm not a person of faith. I was born and raised Catholic, and I think I'm very culturally in that vein through just being raised in Jesuit prep school or whatever. But I think that there's something beautiful about that idea that the way we cast out fear is with perfect love. And I think our goal with our clients is to let them know that they are loved and championed and supported. And I think that I feel like so much of like 1980s or before is like, I mean, I like to play with 1980s public speaking, but I would say so much educational training was about punishing or belittling or shaming. And it's like, if I'm negative, that's going to fire you to do better. And I'm like, sure, that's an approach. And I think championing people and having people show up big and bigger because you have a bigger listening for them, I think that's also a way in that is sometimes undervalued. And, I'll say very quickly, I had a woman once say to me, I'm looking for a coach and I want you to be, she said, I want you to be brutally honest with me. And I said to her, I will never be brutal anything, right? Because if we think about the words that we use, like, that brutality is all about hurting and wounding. And again, that to me is not a useful place to be building from, because I'm building from fear or anger or sadness. And that could be fuel, but I think that fuel is only going to get you so far. And and you know what? I spent so much of my life trying to harness that fuel. It's like coal, or it's not a renewable resource. I love that I'm saying this out loud.
Mm.
You now, this is the first time that I'm saying this. This is fucking good, right?
Well,
But
it's on record.
I think that there's something very powerful about if the fuel is love and joy, that is renewable. That is a fuel that I can come back to, a fuel that's needed. And it's one thing for us to create the container where you can feel that. And I think that's why people keep coming back to us, right?
Yeah.
And we can teach you how you can be a Tesla and recharge that yourself.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know why I did the product placing with the Tesla, but the point is that you can
Yeah.
refuel that yourself,
Yeah.
right? In relationship to your audience. And I think that is a different approach. That's a different way in. And I think that actually speaks to the moment that we're in. And that doesn't mean that I can't be honest. That doesn't mean that I can't
Yes.
highlight the things that you're doing that are, like we like to say, less thrilling. That doesn't
Yes.
mean that you don't have room to be better. You absolutely have room to be better, right? But it is not of highest service to you to say that sucked, or you're stupid, or I know so many people who are so much better than you are, or that moment was really disappointing, or who you are is really disappointing. Or, I mean, just even saying that, like where anyone would feel the permission to be able
Yeah.
to say that to another human being, it's like so hurtful. And we all know how the brains work. Is you have one person, if you have 100 people, if you have 99 people who say glorious things to you, and one person who has that comment, who are you going to think about? That one person who had that comment. It's just how our brains are operating. So we have to really learn how to exercise that muscle so that voice doesn't hijack your power, or hijack the glory and the truth and joy of what it is that you have to share and communicate.
Yeah. And it is so clear, not just the methodology of how you do the work that you do, but the culture that you do create supports all of that, and it
Mm,
supports the fueling with love. So that's really
mm,
beautiful.
great.
As we wrap up, I just wanted to thank you for showing up fully authentically today, as yourself.
Yeah.
There's many versions of ourselves that we can put out into the world, and I think
Mm,
many people have probably seen a version of you that's on a stage dancing and doing all of these things, and then there's this version of you that is here today,
mm.
and they're
On a
all
bed.
true, and they're all you on
Yeah.
a bed. Yes.
On a
I
bed.
wasn't gonna
I'm
call
going
it
to
out,
say it,
but yeah,
convalescing after
good,
surgery last
good.
week, right? And I think
Yeah,
that is,
yeah.
and they're all true, and I think to end with Whitman, do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am multitudes. And I think that we are all multitudes. And what an opportunity to live in this stretch of allowing
Mm.
people to see our multitudinousness, like allow them to see our
Yeah.
multitudes, that I am not one thing, I am many things. And sometimes those things can be in
Yes.
contradiction, and that is okay. Uh, and, uh, and what a beautiful opportunity to continue to allow ourselves grace and permission to be seen as bigger and better and more whole and complete than we ever thought was possible.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you.
Eduardo is such a great beacon of bravery and authenticity, and this was really a treat for me to get into his story in this episode. We talked about people pleasing and hiding ourselves, and we talked about moving from that into trusting yourself and really living your truth, both in our identities, but also on a stage or in a brainstorm, really capturing that moment, leaning into that moment of truth and inspiration. And I would leave you with a couple of questions to reflect on. And if you're a journaler, maybe you want to journal about it. And if you're not, I would say that it might be something to try out. And I will tell you that I actually hated journaling for a really long time. I felt like for some reason I would have to provide all of the context to my journal about what was going on. And it was as if I was describing it to a stranger. And that's what I didn't like about journaling is it felt like I had to edit myself or I had to provide context. And the thing that really changed for me going from journaling to kind of more of this idea of free writing was super helpful for me. And it happened when I discovered what's called morning pages, which is a daily practice from a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I'll link the book and I'll also share a link to this specific practice. But I felt like I had to kind of create this edited contextual idea of whatever it is that I wanted to write. And when I started doing morning pages, I was able to reframe journaling into a free write or a brain dump or a heart dump. And that it's not for anyone to see, but actually just for the process of getting something out of me and onto a page. And doing that with the intention to throw it away or even burn it afterwards, not writing for the purpose of me or someone else reading it afterwards, but writing for the purpose of this release, this process, and not for the outcome of what's on the page. That really changed something for me. So here are the questions that I would offer up to you. As you reflect back on this episode, where are you holding yourself back from showing up fully? Where are you favoring your connection to others and sacrificing your connection to yourself? And last, where can you step into courage and curiosity and maybe test the waters? Bringing a part of you forward that maybe past evidence told you that you had to hide.